All right, too. Okay. All right. So the other day we talked about the new assignment, project part 2A, right? Let me just remind you, of course, the posted solution is available for part 1, and it's probably a good idea for the majority of students to use it as the starting point for part 2. Now, please don't be insulted. I'm not saying that your code isn't any good, but having us all working on the same platform at the same time eliminates a lot of variation that can cause issues, right? So it's just probably a little bit more reliable way to approach things for you, right, as you're just taking on the new material that you're learning. But don't worry, if you had any problems with your part 1, I'm more than willing to take time to go back over it with you. I encourage you to compare your own first, right, with the posted solution. But if you have any questions or any issues or just need some help getting something working, we'll be happy to sit down and work with you to get that solved as well. So you're not going to lose anything, but I'm just saying that if you take the posted solutions at each stage, then you don't have to worry about any lingering issues. You can just focus on the new material, but it's entirely up to you, right? So we've already talked about the instructions. I'm not going to beat this to death and go over it again, but I did want to mention one of the reasons why I've moved up some material in the flow of the course a little bit, this whole business of our start time and end time. Right, remember, just to quickly summarize, we simplified the model a little bit as shown up here. We got rid of function detail, right? The client just didn't feel it was very necessary. So we have a function, we have a type of function the customer is for. We might have multiple rooms involved in the function, and optionally there might be a food service component, a meal type, right? But for the function then, we got away from just having the date and we have the two start and end times. And that's really the focus of why I've moved up this next segment that we're going to cover in step 6. We're adding the appointment to the medical office, right? Anyway, enough about that. We've already talked about that, so I'll leave that alone for now. All right, so I can get rid of this too. Okay, so coming into week 4 then, right, we're starting off with this discussion about appointments. Now, let me point out here, first of all, the change I made, okay, to make this flow a little bit better as well. Uh, you notice that this says version 2 of our basic medical office data model, right? So I've also added this one-to-many relationship between doctor and appointment. Okay. Remember, we talked before, an appointment was a natural associative entity between patient and the reason they might go for an appointment, right? But as well, it's obviously satisfied the relationship between doctor and patient, that is the particular doctor the patient went to see for their appointment, right? So that makes total sense. So we end up with 3, count them, 3 foreign keys inside of appointment, because really it's a common child with 3 separate parent entities, although this one is a nullable or optional parent, you might say. There may or may not be a reason specified for the appointment. But I just want to point out as well that there is a difference. There's 2 ways then that doctor and patient are related. Through the direct one-to-many relationship, okay, shown at the top here, well, for sure, that is describing what we have talked about in the past as the primary care physician of the patient, right? This is a doctor that is primarily the one that looks after this patient. However, they need an appointment this afternoon. That doctor is away at a conference somewhere or whatever, so they're seeing a different doctor in the clinic, right? So that's the doctor they're going to see in this appointment. So, that's the scenario we're going to build on, and it gives us an opportunity to deal with that tricky issue sometimes of start and end dates and times, right? Because the appointment, it makes sense, would have that. Okay. In fact, down here, I just mentioned that the appointments associate the many-to-many between the appointment reason and patient, as well as the many-to-many from doctor to patient. Okay. A patient might have an appointment with any doctor at the clinic, not just their primary care physician. So I think that's pretty clear. I think we understand the model that we're going to go forward with. Uh, so there's the one-to-many from doctor to appointment, right? And of course, there's also the appointment reason, which is optional with that nullable foreign key. Okay. All right. So that's the background of what we're doing today. So what I have my copy paste file. So you have a copy of it as well right here. You can use it to follow along as we do our work. Okay. So we're going to take what I have in Visual Studio is I have the version that we last left. It's posted up there for after step 5. Now I have to confess I did one little thing. I noticed that I usually do it and I hadn't. because the solution name just had medical office without a space, just on the underscore layout page, which, as you remember, under views, shared, here's that main layout page we use. It's kind of the shell for the whole web application at this point in time. So I just put a space in the three references to that name, medical office here, and then down in the footer, right? There was medical office here. So I just put spaces. That's the only change I've made from the post solution the way it is right now. All right, so coming back, remember what we had here. We have this commented out right now, the ensure deleted. We might put that back in. I often have it commented out unless I really need to make sure the database is deleted before running the application. By the way, on that point, I wouldn't have it normally deleting it every time because, sometimes you're playing around with data. You create a couple of new records, you're testing something. Well, if you just stop and start the application, all that dummy data you just entered manually is lost because you wipe out everything. So that's why I don't normally have this available to be executed. I comment it out. All right, well, I'm going to just close up. I kind of mentioned that because a student was asking about it. So anyway, I'll just close up everything there, and we're going to carry on with our new appointments, right? So I need to add some classes here, right? So when we come back up here to models, right, I'm going to start off with the appointment reason class. So it's yet another parent class in this family, right? So, I probably could have come up with a better name than appointment reason. Maybe I could have just gone with reason, but it seemed reasonable to say appointment reason, right? And it is just your classic simple little lookup, right? Despite the imposing looking annotations, it's really just a simple integer identity ID and a name, a string for the name, right? Now, what else do I have in here? Well, we've seen this done before. This is what we often call a navigation property inside the parent in a parent-child, or on the one side of a one-to-many. We'll often have this there so we can do a dot include, right? So I can go and get one or more appointment reasons, right? And include all the related appointment objects, right, in this collection. Okay, now of course it's underlining right now because I haven't created this class yet. Don't worry, that's coming up next. So let's do that. I'm going to right click models, add another class, right? And it's going to be my appointment class. Okay, and I'll just get my code here for it. Boom, quite a bit of code, but don't worry, we'll talk about it all. Okay, so get that pasted in. Of course, it's going to take a minute here to uh, get rid of all the red underlining. All right, so there we go. Now I shrunk down the summary properties region for now because I kind of don't want to get distracted by that just yet. We're going to come back and spend quite a bit of time talking about how we can put together useful summary properties. I've gone overkill, to be honest with you, for this example, but we'll leave that for a moment. So what do we have here? I have my appointment, and why am I inheriting from my validatable object? What is that used for in general? Can anyone help me out in the chat window, perhaps? We've talked about it already. iValidatable object. Okay, maybe I'll lead you to it a little bit. So we know that we've used data annotations in this code quite a bit, as we talked about and was covered in your textbook tutorial, right? Because they give us a lot of easy validation, like required, ranges, regular expressions even, and so on and so forth, that give us a lot of power in terms of providing not only validation when we're working with the class directly in our C# code, but it actually, right, propagates down and to provide proper error messages and feedback to the client right on the client side in their browser, assuming the browser can support JavaScript, right? But these days, that's usually not as rare as it used to be a number of years ago. Right? Just about everybody, even if they turn off features, very rarely would anybody turn off all support for that are necessary for these messages to show up, right? So it seamlessly then putting this in one place. It's a great example of the don't repeat yourself approach, right? We put this in one spot, and it actually carries through right back. It affects how the database is built, but it also carries right down to the interface itself, the web page inside the client browser, right? So that's great. I mean, and plus it gives immediate feedback even before, in many cases, posting back to the server. But there are some things you cannot check, You cannot check until you get all the data into the server, right? And that's where iValidatable object really helps. Plus, anything that you have a hard time coming up with a good data annotation to provide validation, you can always do it here. You can always do it in the validate event. So that's why we're inheriting here, because one of the things that always makes sense, I might as well come down and look at it. When you have well, I'll use the word time span, right? Even though that's a official data type in C sharp, that's okay. You know what I mean, a time span. There's a start time and an end time. Well, it only makes sense that you should always double check. You should validate that they're in the correct order, that the end time comes after the start time, right? Or certainly not before it. So that's the logical test here. If the end time comes before the start time, well, that's no good. So we'll add a validation result. Appointment cannot end before it starts, and we'll show that. I decided to show it beside end time. Right, I figured that was a logical spot to put it. I could have just put it in the summary at the top of the page by not having anything in here, but I think that it's better to actually say that it's going to be beside the end time. Okay, let's get back to the actual properties in here then. All right, so not surprisingly, here's my start time, right? Notice my annotation is a little different. The other day when we actually just had a date, right? Uh, it was a DateTime data type, but we put up this. We said data type dot date instead of dot DateTime, right? Right here. With dot date, it automatically then creates in the user interface for us a simple little pop-up calendar where you just choose the date in the calendar, right? And that's great. Okay, and it only lets you to type in the certain values, the hours, the months, years, months, days, and so on. So it was ideal for working with just a date. But in this case, I need to allow the user to manipulate the time component as well, right? So if they're meeting the doctor at 11 a.m., right, they have to actually be able to put that time component in. So setting data type to data type dot date time, the user interface will automatically give not just a little pop-up calendar, but some little scroll things that you can scroll up and down and set the hours, minutes, and so on, right? And AM versus PM. So, we're going to get all that for free, right? Don't you like stuff that's free? We get all that just by adding this one annotation. So we have the same one on both the start time and end time, right? Okay, now, and a little subtle here, difference. I have a question mark here because this is a nullable date time, right? Oh, I just noticed we should have a required. Did I miss that? And nobody even said anything in my other class. Okay, required error message equals you must enter a date for the appointment. That looks good. And date, maybe a start time for the appointment. All right. Ooh, that's better. Okay. I don't know how I missed that. I must have had it there and accidentally deleted it or something. I don't know. Anyway, all right. So down here's an interesting one. Notes. Okay. The doctor will need to write some notes about the appointment. Oh, I saw John and he had this and this and complained about this again. Whatever, right? So it's a chance to introduce, because we're going to allow up to 2,000 characters for notes, right? An appropriate input would be not just a text box, but a whole text block, right? So we can get that by setting data type to multi-line text, okay? Later on, we'll see that we can actually specify how many lines we really want to show if we want to change it. But right now, the user can just make it bigger, make it taller, and type more, et cetera, et cetera. So that's good enough for now. Okay, then we have an extra fee. Yes, hey, we have free healthcare in Canada. That's great. But, sometimes certain things you go to the doctor's office for, and the doctors will simply say, well, you know what? Uh, yes, I'll do you a note for your employer that you were sick and couldn't go to work, but there's a fee, right? So those letters from the doctor's office often encounter an extra fee. So I'm putting a default value of 20 bucks, right, on the extra fee. Of course, it might not be applicable, but hey, might as well have a default there. And that way the doctor can make extra money. All right, then we come down to our foreign keys. Now remember, we're going to have three. There's the doctor, right? So again, we have the pair, the actual doctor object, then our integer representing the foreign key as it's actually stored. So in the appointment table, it's stored as this integer for doctor ID. We need a display name to just say doctor. It doesn't look very professional if the field name doctor ID was what was visible on the screen, right? Again, it's required, it's not nullable, so we need a nice error message for that. I don't really need this, to be honest with you, but I had it in here and I don't feel motivated to take it out. But I think you understand that you can just use the name of the property here, doctor, and it would be exactly the same. Take it out if you want. All right. Okay. Patient, once again, okay. Our integer patient ID, I have a display name for it. The actual object is what really defines in the database the one-to-many relationship, but at the same time, it also gives us the option of dot including the patient object when we get an appointment. Same as doctor. Okay, the third one is almost the same, our appointment reason. Remember, that was the third parent in this strange family, right? And the main difference here is it is a nullable int, right? So it's not required. Okay, notice we don't have a required data annotation on the appointment reason ID as well, okay? And that does mean that we don't necessarily have uh, reason for the appointment. And remember though, let's come back here for a second. On the reason name, we added this. I kind of skipped over it quickly, but we've used it once before. We can set a display format. We can provide a null display text, okay? And so if there is no reason given, then on the view, it would actually just say no reason given, right? So it's not just blank where, you might think, oh, it just wasn't set. But no, in this case, it's actually specifying no reason was given for this appointment. And that works along with the nullable nature of the actual foreign key itself. Any questions about any of that before we go on? Okay, and then finally we just have our validate, and we talked about that already, making sure the time inputs are in the correct order. All right, so we have our new third parent in this family. We have the common child here. I'll just save that for now. And of course, we do have to make a couple other changes, right? Remember how over here in the appointment reason, we had this line of code, so we could include, okay, the appointments. Well, we have two other parents here that might want to do the same thing. So down in doctor, right? Just like I can include the patients based on that primary care physician relationship, I might want to include the appointments. So I need to have that here in order to allow that. And same thing in patient. I usually add these down near the bottom, right? There's the one for patient conditions. I'll just go after that and we'll put in the one for appointments. Okay, that's it. Those are all the changes I have to make for this step in terms of the actual model classes themselves, right? But there's other work that has to be done before we can actually start using all this code, right? Obviously, we need some work in our DB context because that's our window into the database, and the database has to maintain this additional information now, right? So obviously we need two more DB sets. Okay, DB set is just a fancy collection with all those abilities to call, save, and changes and so on, right? So I have a DB set for appointment, okay, and we pluralize it in the same way, right? It's a niggly thing, but it's pretty important. Our class names themselves should always be in the singular form, and then when we have a collection of them any sort, we usually put it in the plural form. It only makes sense to do it that way, doesn't it? I think it does, and that's the standard approach. Then we should make sure we follow that as well, right? It's the kind of thing I don't give marks for, but if you don't follow that, there's the danger that I might take away marks as a result. All right, now, whenever you add new entities, you have to think about, okay, there's always this issue of cascade delete, and that's something else that we can look after here in the Fluent API, which is the common name used in all the online tutorials and so on from Microsoft for the code that we put in the on model creating, right? I've mentioned it before, but you can do just about anything in here you want, right? Even if you didn't use data annotations. Okay, so the issue of cascade delete, right? So I'm going to come down here after the ones I have in place already. I'm just going to grab my code first of all, because it's not something totally new, but bears discussion, right? Okay, my first comment here is note, allow cascade delete from patient to appointment. Now, this is a design decision. It's not right or wrong, okay? It could be that if you talk to your client, the medical office that you're building this application for, they say, well, you know what? If there's any appointments in the system for the patient, then no, I want you to be prevented from deleting the patient. They might decide that they do want that restriction in place, right? But no, we're on the assumption that they say, no, you know what, sometimes we enter a patient, make an appointment, and they've moved to New Brunswick, and we just want to clear them out of the system. So I don't want to have to manually go in and delete the history of all the appointments one by one before I can remove the patient, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to allow that cascade delete to happen. So for that, we don't do anything because it doesn't have a nullable foreign key, right? It will automatically do the cascade delete, right? Delete the parent. It'll automatically clean up all that history of appointments as well. But we don't want to allow it from doctor or appointment reason. Okay. So just to emphasize, I've talked about this before, the fact that we can define this delete behavior, right? First, we identify what relationship it is we're talking about, and then we set the delete behavior for on delete, right? So everything really from here up to here is identifying the relationship. What are the two entities involved in the relationship? And it doesn't matter if you start with the parent one or from the child, right? It makes no difference. So this one I wrote just for the fun of it from the child point of view, right? Because appointment is a child to appointment reason. It's on the many side. It has the foreign key inside it, right? That makes it the child, so to speak, right? So we come from appointment has one appointment reason with many appointments, has the foreign key, the appointment reason ID, right? So all that code up to there is just identifying what relationship we're talking about. Then we say on delete behaviors restrict, right? So just for fun, I wrote the other one from the parent point of view instead. So the doctor is a parent to the appointment, right? So we see doctor has many appointment objects, okay, referred to in its property called appointments, et cetera, et cetera. So we come down here, we're going to restrict the on delete behavior there as well. Okay, so that is it. That's the only changes we have to make in the Fluent API. Ooh, we're on a roll here. Okay, now we're going to need a migration or maybe start a new set of migrations. Remember, I'll remind you that last year, okay, I just told the students, always just delete the migration folder, start a brand new migration. You only ever have one migration, which kind of defeats the purpose of migrations in a sense, but it's the way we had to work with SQLite. SQLite has gotten better, right? It is more supportive of different migrations, and quite often we can get away with it. Sometimes you have to delete the database, okay, but you don't always have to delete the entire set of migrations. So right now, look at, I have two, right? I had the initial one and one where I added that medical history, right? So we're going to try yet again to add another migration. So we know we do that down in the package manager console. So I'll get that up on the screen. And to save me thinking from scratch, because who wants to have to think? I've only had one coffee today. I don't want to have to think that hard. So I know I've used these commands before. Add migration, specify the context, medical office context. I'm going to leave out the name because I'm going to have to use a different name, right? I'll get an error message if I tried to use the same name. Now I could push enter and it'll prompt me for the name. It'll say, oh, you have to have a name for your migration. Or I can just hit a space and give it a name. So maybe I'll call it appointment. All right, I'll just press enter and it's going to do a build. Okay, there's no reason I have to do a build first, but sometimes I remember to do it and sometimes I don't. One of the advantages of doing the build first is if there is an error, you can just start diagnosing it right away. And there I go, medical terms, diagnosing the error, right? Digging into it, figuring out what was wrong. So I didn't have any errors. It successfully built and it created my migration. Good, so far so good, right? So notice that these are all steps will be applied to the database as it exists after the first two migrations are done, right? That's the whole idea of migrations. We subsequently describe in each one the changes that reflect the changes we've recently made to the actual models themselves, right? So we see the things here creating these different indexes, right? Of course, the new entities and even modifying the relationships and so on. Okay, so that's good. Now, I can try update database. It might work, but it might not. And it did. Sir, I wanted it to fail. Okay, the reason it did is I opened this from the zip archive and I have never run it yet, right? So, you know, I didn't have an issue, right, with the medical office. So anyway, it was successful, so I don't have to worry about it. If I'd had an error, usually the quick fix is to delete the database and then just start over, right? Try it again, and if that doesn't work, then come in, delete the entire migrations folder, right? Start off with your new initial migration based on. Don't worry, you're not really losing anything. The changes you've made are all contained in the model classes themselves, right? So that contains all the changes. So if we just basically say, hey, we're going to start fresh based on the current model classes and all their properties as we've set them up, right? Then there's nothing really wrong with that, and you can go forward. Okay, anyway, we want to seed some data, right? It's always much more fun if you have some data. Now, the textbook tutorial started off teaching you some basic approaches with add range and so on to just get a few records in. I went hog wild the other day, right? Adding all kinds of seed data because the client wanted to see much more data in their application. Okay, I'm not going to ever penalize you, Marks, for not having a huge amount of seed data, but you know what? It's kind of fun programming to do after a while, right? So, the main thing to drive the point home here about adding more seed data is most important thing, think about the order. It is going to be the same order right back when you learned in database fundamentals that you have to make tables in a certain order. Ones that depend on other tables have to come after them, right? Well, it makes sense that inserting data comes the same way. You can't insert data in tables where that record is going to depend on data in a different table if you haven't made that record first, right? So what do we have to think about here? Well, what I would suggest, remember, we're adding a few things here with add range, right? And then we're adding much more data. Decided to leave that. Hope it's not confusing. We're just manually adding a few records first, just so I know, for example, that I'm going to have a Fred Flintstone, right? And then down here, we're just going to use our looping structures to go through and create lots and lots of data, right? So I want to come down after I've created all the doctors and patients, and even after I've done this command. Remember, this was that interesting one. We're actually executing raw SQL against the database to delete all the doctors using this not exists correlated subquery, all the doctors that don't have any patients. Okay, so I'm going to do it right after that and before we do conditions, right? Here's where I'm going to put some code. So I'll just make some white space, and I'm just going to get all the code and bring it over and paste it in. Okay. All right, so bear with me. And we'll talk about it in Visual Studio where we can see it with color coding and highlighting and everything else. Much more easy to talk about it there than in Notepad. Okay. All right, so coming back up here where we started. Oh, went too far up. Hang on. Okay, here, right? Okay. See data for appointments, start with appointment reasons, right? So again, I'm using this approach of creating a string array of all the values I want to insert. So I can just loop through that array, right? And add a record for each one. So for each one, we're newing up an appointment reason, right? Assigning the reason name, okay, as we loop through them all. And then when we're done building all these, we can just call save changes once, right? You could call it every time, but that's kind of a waste. We might as well wait till we have added all of these records to the appointment reasons DB set, and then we just call save changes once. So that's good. That gets me all my reasons. So just to have a quick look here at the data, I have things like illness, accident, COVID-19, add to the list if you so desire, right? Okay, now remember that our appointment included that big field where we can type notes about the appointment. Well, sometimes helpful to have a large amount of text. I'm sure you've come across this before. In web development, there's a standard block called lorem ipsum. I'm probably not even saying that right, okay? But you know what I mean, right? It's that bunch of Latin gobbledygook that is used as filler for text on a web page during development, just so you can kind of get a feeling for the layout. Well, fortunately for us that are just bored by seeing the same Latin over and over again, there's a whole bunch of variations out there. So one of them, if you do a Google search for bacon ipsum, you'll find it's a little tool. You can define how many words you want, and it'll generate, and how many variations you want, and it'll generate a whole bunch of text for you, all with, sorry for any vegan students in the audience here. Okay, it's all things related to meat, meat. Where's the meat? Okay. All right. So that's what we have. So I have my bacon note. So it's just I've got a string array here. I've got a few different ones of these inside. I think there's 5 of them, right? 5 of these collections of words all generated by this tool, Bacon Ipsum. Okay, if you want to use vegan Ipsum, I'm sure there's one out there as well, right? Okay, collections for the primary keys. Well, we've done this before. Because I want to loop through and use the actual values that are legitimately stored in the database right now, I'm going to go and get them, right? So I'll go to the appointment reasons, just select all the IDs, put it into an array. I'm going to count it so I don't have to count it more than once, just for efficiency. Same thing for patients, right? Now, we already have that for doctors, right? Because we used that when we were creating more patients with our nested loops. But remember, created this array of all the valid doctor IDs before we removed, right, all the ones that had no corresponding patient with that raw SQL we executed. So that's why I have to notice I don't have to declare the data types here because these variables already exist. But I'm just going to refresh the data in them by doing the select over again because some doctors have almost certainly been removed, right? And I don't want to use any doctors that aren't in the system. Okay. All right. So now I'm ready, right, to start making this uh, intersection between 3 different entities, right? We'll add a few appointments to each patient, okay? So I'm going to loop through, okay? As long as there aren't any appointments, I'm going to loop through every patient we have. I'm going to give a few to each patient, right? So I got a few counters here just to talk about them. Just a simple counter to loop through all the patients, right? Patient uh, each one the patient ID. If there's 50 IDs, then I will go from, you know, right through that whole 50 of them, right? J is just a counter, so we'll add some appointments to a patient, right? And K, what I want to do with the appointment reasons, I want to guarantee I use each one. So instead of randomly choosing them, I might choose the same one 20 times or whatever. I'm going to just start as the first one and then subsequently use the next and the next and the next every time I create an appointment. When I run out of them, I'll just go back to the beginning of the list. So that's what this K counter is being used for. So let us step through the appointment reasons, right? And then we'll go back and reset the list when we run out of reasons for appointments. Okay, so I start off with it set to 0 because that's the index of the first appointment reason, right? I'm going to calculate how many I'm going to make for this particular patient by randomly selecting, okay, between 1 and 1 less than the number of reasons that there are, right? Okay, all right, so that's my J will just be used to go up to that how many as an upper limit, right? As I come in here, here is where I check to see have I run out of reasons, have I used them all, and have to go back to the beginning, right? That's what this is about. If K is greater than or equal to the count of appointment reasons, then I'll put it back to 0. Otherwise, I'll just use the current value, right? Okay, then I get where I actually make the appointment, right? Okay, so I build my little appointment. I set the patient ID with that that counter going through, and that will contain the actual ID of a real patient in the database, right? Then I'm going to randomly choose my appointment, not randomly, I'm going to choose the next appointment reason. Okay. I'm going to randomly set the start date. Now, here's a bit of a trick. Okay. Before I go on, let me talk about, I might be tempted to put, because now I want a time component, not just a day. So I might go datetime.now and then, subtract a number to, put a day in the past, a random date in the past, right? Not a good idea. Okay. The reason is, of course, the date time. Well, pardon me, we know it has years, months, days, hours, minutes, seconds, but it keeps on going, right? Get to fractions and fractions of a second and so on, right? Well, if we use DateTime now, you'll get a value with even fractions of a second involved. And then, okay, when that's in the data, when it goes to generate the user input on the screen, it'll actually have choices to choose hours, minutes, seconds, fractions of a second, right? Well, we don't want that, okay? So I start off with a simple assumption that I'm just going to use the actual date. Okay, so DateTime today just returns the date part, and they're going to subtract a certain amount, a random amount of days from that. And then we'll deal with the rest. I can't use the value in here to help me calculate, say, an end time until I've actually saved it, right? Because it doesn't really exist yet, okay? I'm actually providing values for the properties as I instantiate the object. So they aren't available to work with outside, which is why we have to finish building it with everything required first, and then I can manipulate other properties based on values that I have in here. So my notes are just randomly select, okay, one of the 5 bacon notes that I have, And I will randomly choose a doctor out of the legitimate values. I have my doctor IDs, right? Okay, now I've made the basic appointment object, but I'm not done. I'm not done with it, right? We're going to set a start time now. I'm going to add hours, okay? Because remember, with a date time today, it's going to be basically midnight in the morning, right? So I'm going to randomly add a number of hours between 8 hours and 16, right? So the earliest appointment will be 8 a.m., okay? And it'll go as late as, actually, I'm going to change that to 17 because I want it to go late as, uh, because it'll never reach this value, right? So I want it to be able to go up and hit 16. Sorry, I meant to change that in my copy paste file, but you can do it yourself, right? And then now we have a start time that includes a number of hours. I'm going to add for the end time, a random number of minutes later, okay? But I don't want it to be like 21 or 23 minutes later. I want it to be increments of 10, right? So I'm going to take my start time. I'm going to add a new, what? A new time span, okay? Now the time span, okay, I pass in this other overloads, but I can pass in integer values for the number of hours, minutes, and seconds in this time span. Well, I don't want hours and I don't want seconds, which is why you see 0 at the beginning and 0 at the end. But in the middle there for minutes, I'm going to randomly choose a number from 1 to 12, right? And then multiply that by 10. That gives me 10-minute increments, right? So that I think will come up with a reasonable value for an end time. Okay, so we're making all these modifications to the initial appointment that was created earlier on. Finally, remember we talked about the extra fee? Seems a little bit selfish of the doctor to add a $20 fee on every single appointment in the system, right? But I'm too lazy to get even smarter about it. So I'm just using the modulus function here. So basically every second appointment, right? Because if divided by 2 gives you an even number, then okay, it's satisfied this expression. And so I'll just set the extra fee equal to 0, right? Really, it should be 0D, shouldn't it? But anyway, it works. And then finally, before I come back, I will increment my K. Remember that goes through all the appointment reasons. Okay. By the way, this habit of using like I, J, K, and so on for counters, that goes way back to the early days of computer programming. So I'm showing my gray hair here in a sense that, right from early days of Fortran and COBOL and so on, these little variable names were commonly used for simple counters for loops and so on. So if you're wondering why I came up with those names, that's the reason why. Years and years of abuse. I mean, years and years of experience. All right. And then we add the appointment to our appointments collection, right? So when we finish making all the appointments, we only have to call save changes one time. And that's it. That's all the code to then get our data in place. So I kind of digress there, waxing lyrical, is that the right term, about all this? But that's okay. It should get the job done and we should actually have some data to show. Now, we have nothing yet to show it, right? So we need to scaffold a controller and view. So I will do a build now just to make sure, because if I have a build error, I won't be successful in scaffolding controllers and views either. So I might as well make sure, check, build one succeeded. Okay, so I'm ready to carry on. I might as well close this, get it off the screen. Coming up to controllers, right? I'm going to add a controller. Oop, so used to adding classes, okay? For appointments. So I want an MVC controller with all the goodies, with views, using Entity Framework, and it's going to be my appointments controller, right? Now, later on, we're going to be playing around, but this is going to be okay. It's not a waste of time because we'll be able to use much of the code that we generate here. But later on, we're going to focus not so much on just going in and managing appointments. We'll usually manage appointments from the point of view of a master detail page, right? Where the master is probably the patient. So we go to the patient and then we deal with all of their appointments underneath the basic information about the patient, right? So that comes later on, but for now, it's not going to hurt for us to make a simple standalone appointments controller, right? So we'll let that cook for a moment. It's like Julia Child doing her cooking show. Okay, we put this in the oven and now we pretend that it's cooked and we bring it back out again, right? So there we go. So now we have our controller in place, but I'm going to want to have a link. And I always forget to do this. So before I forget, let's come down. Where do we put links in our navigation system? Anyone want to help me out? What page do I go to or what view? Oh, I gave half of it away right there. Where's my nav system? Oh, be brave. Get those fingers moving on the keyboard and type the answer in. I'll give you a hint. It's showing on the screen right now. It's under views, and it's something we share across many views when we want to do the layout. Oh, I gave it away. That's right. Views, shared layout. Okay. It's right here in the layout view. Come on, you got to get with me and help me out with these demonstrations, folks. Okay, so here are the nav links I have so far. I just have my home to go back to the home page, doctors and patients. So I'm going to steal one of these, copy, paste it in. And remember how these tag helpers work, right? The controller in this case will not be patients, it will be appointments. Okay. The action is still index, right? Because that's the initial or the default action we want to go to. That's the one that lists all the appointments. But we're going to change, of course, the actual text displayed in the link so it matches appointments, right? Okay. All right. So that's good. So we actually have that and we have our appointments. So we're ready to actually go and have a look. Okay. So I'm going to click the run button here, just using the built-in Kestrel web server. So as I say in my copy paste notes, later on, we're going to change the approach to manage appointments from the patient point of view, right? Oh, it's opening on the other screen. Okay. Actually, I want to change the browser I'm using anyway. Oh, it is set to the Brave browser. Funny, it didn't look right. Sorry, I digress. Okay. So I come to patients, and here we go. Look at all this, okay? All this data for patients, right? Uh, and doctors, okay? We had all that already, but this is the new stuff, the appointments. So I click appointments, there we are. So I see the start and the end date and time, right? The whole thing there, my notes, my extra fee, okay, the doctor. Now, obviously we got to do a lot of the kinds of fix-ups we've done before. Like notice the doctor is only using the first name, right? Patient is actually, it chose the email as the property of the patient to display here, right? When it scaffolded this code, right? Probably not the best choice. Okay, I might actually use the full name of the patient, might be a little bit better. Reason for appointment, well, that's handling that okay, right? That's good. But that's, not the best interface yet, but obviously we do things like the notes would almost certainly come off of the index, right? That's the kind of thing you go to the details view to go and read the actual notes about the appointment. Even the extra fee we'd probably put over there and so on, and maybe even the reason for appointment. Or you might want to leave that here. It's a design decision. I can't say a right or a wrong about that. But look at this date time. So we have the date. Now the only reason it's spread across multiple vertical lines here is because there isn't the width to necessarily show it, right? So maybe I'll just minimize for a second. I'm going to come to the actual uh, view, coming up to views into appointments. Let's get the index view up here. So maybe I'm going to first say, well, you know what? The notes, I can just take them right off. Don't need them here, right? So take it out of the header, take it out of here. Okay, and while I'm at it, this is bugging me. So the doctor, I don't know, full name, formal name, I'm not sure which is better to use in this case, but definitely the full name for the patient, right? Okay, so let me just save those changes so far and come back to the browser, right? Okay, so there, my hot reload took care of it. So now I've moved the notes off. So now we have a little bit more space. We're just using one line for each appointment record. But has it made this much more readable? Not really, right? I can tell you right now from experience working with end users, they absolutely detest information displayed this way. Okay. Year, month, day, month, year, whatever, right? Hour, minute, second, AM, PM. They hate to see that. Okay. It just will make them very, very unhappy. And that brings us to the last bit of work we're going to do, right? Where we're going to talk about those summary properties. Now, the extra fee I left there, the doctor patient looked much better, at least than what they were. And a reason for appointment is there. But let me show you the edit page. Edit and create are going to look very similar. Now this the user can live with, okay? This kind of an input. So when I click that, notice I get the date, okay, as well as I have the hours and minutes in AM or PM. Yeah, client sees that and goes, ooh, I like that. Okay, that's okay. So if I want to make it for the 17th, okay, starting at 11 a.m., there we go. Of course, you can always just type up in here and change the individual numbers here as well, right? You can use a little pop-up or you can just type in the values. It works both ways. So users are happy enough with it this way, but I can tell you right now, they are not going to be happy. Look at that. Can I end before it starts? Gosh, look at that validation. Okay. So it starts at 11 a.m. and so it finishes at 11:20, but it's a different day, right? So I'd actually have to make this the 17th. And then now when I click save, it should work, right? And it did, right? But you know what? There's very little value in displaying the information this way. So let's stop running for a second. I'm going to actually go back to the class and we're going to talk about those summary properties. Well, you know what? Even before I talk about them, I'm going to replace this index page with the copy I have in my copy paste file, right? So let me just grab that out of my code here, Control C, gonna Control A, select everything, delete it, and replace it with my revised version. Let me run it again. I wanted to give you a variety. Now, not all of these actually would be applicable necessarily to this particular application, but I wanted to demonstrate for you a variety of ways to display the same information, right? Commonly, what you might do is have just the date showing. Users hate seeing that date and date time put together, right? So here's the date of the appointment, here's the start time and the end time, right? As well as a duration, right? Now let me edit this record again. If I go in here and edit it, and well, let's actually put this on the 18th. Click save. Okay, so notice what I'm doing. So the start time didn't change, but the end time, it shows the actual time, but notice we're saying, okay, 1 day later, right? That's one way to give feedback to the user. Now, if you have a medical appointment with your doctor that actually goes more than 24 hours, you must be really, really sick. Okay, I feel sorry for you. Okay, so that's not a very applicable kind of solution for a medical appointment. But think about how you might use this in the case of a function at a hotel. Ooh, which is what you have to do in your homework assignment, right? Well, in that case, you might have the Smitherson wedding, okay, that starts at 7 in the evening and runs till 2 in the morning the next day, right? So yeah, in this case, you might actually find that a very helpful way to present the data. Or another way is with this duration, right? So if there's more than 1 day, it'll show the days, the minutes, okay? Down here you see hours and minutes, right? So it'll always show you breaking it up into how many days, how many hours, how many minutes, and only show the pertinent information. So if it's 1 hour, it just says 1 hour, right? If it's an hour and 10 minutes, it says an hour and 10 minutes, okay? So I kind of wanted to go through this whole thing. We're going to be adding the appointments later, but I moved it up so we could look at different ways of building the user interface to work with this actual time span situation. Great when you can edit it using this, okay? Users will love it. They'll be happy here, but they hate seeing it expressed the way it initially was on here. So choose something appropriate and come up with your own. You don't have to just, stick with these approaches, but these are giving you a variety of things that you can use, put in your tool belt, because you're going to be doing a lot of work like this especially in your community-sponsored project course next term. So you want to have things that you can use going forward. Let's just have a look at that code just to wrap up this demo. So when we come back to the appointment class, I had it all hidden here in summary properties. So let's just have a quick look, right? Well, the first ones are pretty straightforward. Start date summary, just our start time, toString in our date format, right? Now, I always go to this format of year, month, day. Okay, that is my preferred way to show any date at any time, and I don't care what the local local custom is, right? Pardon me. I needed more coffee. Okay, but oh, by the way, it reminds me to ask because a student asked me the other day, why don't we use small letter M's here? Okay. Oh, it's giving it away. Darn. IntelliSense. Yes, you saw it. Okay. It would be minutes. So it would show the year. And then if the actual time was like 11 a.m., it would actually, or 11:15, it would actually have dash 15, right? And you might think, oh, that's the 15th month. Wait a second, there's no 15th month, right? So yeah, we have to have the capital letter M's to mean month. If we use small letter M's, then it's minutes. Okay, so that's the simple one, right? Notice this is our start time summary. So if we want to show just the time component, it's the same property, start time, but we're two-string it, just showing the time, only showing hours and minutes, and then the TT gives us our AM versus PM, right? That's our two columns there that we used in our summary, right? Now we get a little bit more interesting. So for the end time, okay, remember it's nullable for one thing, right? So if it's null, I'm just going to say unknown, okay? Else, well, I'm going to go and get, first of all, two-string it to the hours, minutes, right, with AM or PM. So that's my basic string that I'm going to start off with for this particular end time summary property, right? Then I'm going to take the difference, okay, calculating between the start time and end time, right? So this will give me a time span, which is an actual structure inside of C#, okay? It's a data type, basically. So then I can take the dot days of the difference, and if it's greater than 0, right, then here is all I'm going to do. I'm going to say how many day, now this is just to make sure it's plural, days instead of day if it's more than one, later, right? And then that will be included after the actual hour, minute, AM, PM display, right? And that's exactly what we saw on the screen. So that's one alternate approach. Last but not least was my duration summary, right? Again, if it's nullable, I decided to just return an empty string. If it's null, there's no end time in this case. And you could do that with the previous one as well. It's entirely what's appropriate in your situation. Again, we calculate that time span. Oh dear. Okay. And I start building up my duration string with an empty string. And then I have a bunch of ifs, my ternary ifs here, right? So if the days is greater than 0, then I add this to it, right? If it's not, okay, then I don't even mention days. Same thing with hours, okay? Then we add to it again. Just this little business here is to pluralize an S on the end of day. Instead of day, it'll say days, hour, it'll say hours if there's more than one, right? And finally, we check minutes, and we decide if we're going to add to our string here any comment about minutes, and if minutes is greater than 0, right? And these are all properties of that time span object, right? It might only contain hours, and that's fine, okay? If it has minutes as well, then we're going to show both. Notice we don't have to worry about pluralizing minute. Small point, but it's worth talking about. Like we did for days and hours, we had to worry about whether we're going to put an S on the end. The multiple of minute short form is min. It's if it's 1 min, it's just 1 min. If it's 2 minutes, it's 1 or 2 min, right? So there's no S to worry about. Okay, so that's it. That's the end of this lecture, this end of this discussion. So we've successfully added our appointments, and principally as well, we've demonstrated a number of different ways in the user interface to set it up so the user can have a nice user-friendly display of the information. By all means, when they go to create or edit, we want to give them the full capability that the system has built into it to give them that nice little pop-up with the calendar and the scroll list for hours and minutes and so on, right? But there we go. Any questions before I stop recording that you want to get captured in the recording? Anybody? All right, well, this is a long enough recording. Again, 53 minutes, so I'm going to stop at this point, and then we'll take a break.